and it could extend to various types of works, from a literary work to an artistic work to a sound recording or even a broadcast. Its ambit is very wide. The important part is that it exists by virtue of its creation, and other than for a cinematograph film, there's no actual way of registering a copyright.
So if I've written a document, then there's copyright in that document?
There would be, and the way you would tell the world out there that there was copyright is to place a copyright notice on it, which would usually be the C in the circle, which I'm sure you've all seen on websites and similar documents, with the year of its creation and the person who claims to own that copyright work. Now, the reason copyright becomes complicated is because it often doesn't follow the ordinary rules that you would expect it to. For example, when a person takes a photograph, you would think the photographer is the author and the owner of the photograph. Not so. Okay. In fact, the person making the arrangements for the taking of the photograph, your art director, may in fact be the copyright owner. Okay. And by virtue of his position in an organization and the contract that he has with them, the organization may in fact own the copyright.
Just for interest sake, you're touching on the photograph issue.
Yes.
I'm standing in public and somebody comes and take a photograph where I'm in the photograph. They didn't specifically take a photograph of me.
Yes.
Do I have any rights?
You have certain personality rights, which are slightly different to your rights, but certainly they couldn't simply take a picture unless you were background. And there is provision made for that, especially in, you'll understand in a film context. Often bystanders are taken pictures of, but in the context of being a bystander.
Now, if I take out, for example, I file a patent, I register a patent, I get 20-year protection if it's approved. What is the situation of copyright?
Copyright extends a bit longer. It's 50 years from the death of the author or from the date of publication when it went into the public domain. And in the USA, they now have extended that copyright term to 70 years. So it offers a fairly long extension period of protection. The importance is to make sure that your rights are protected. And there the important thing is always to realize that copyright can generally not be transferred without a written contract of assignment. Now, the important thing there is, and I think many people don't realize it, you decide that you're going to commission a design agency to come up with a new prototype or a new television advertisement. Okay. Because it's a television advertisement, it would fall into the exceptions, and a commission is allowed in those circumstances. If it's a television work, a cinematograph film, you can commission that as long as you paid for it. But if you ask somebody simply to create a print advertisement and there was no written deed of assignment transferring those rights to the company who in fact asked for the work to be created, the design company or the advertising agency may actually own the copyright in the work.
Okay, so let's just understand that. So
yes.
I, for example, go and I write a book, and I then give this book to somebody to print, and they go and design a whole cover for the book and everything, and there's a form of artwork on that cover. Yeah. I don't necessarily own the artwork and the design work, even though I paid them for it.
Yeah, in the context of your book scenario, the fact that you wrote the work and the words are your own, you would own the copyright in the words. But where it becomes a bit more complicated is that you would then have what they call copyright in the published edition. And the published edition copyright would probably vest in the publisher. And then it comes on to the design of the book cover, and let's assuming it was an outside party. That party would in fact own the artistic creation, the work, and they would own it until such time it was assigned either to you or to the publisher, who may own certain rights in respect to that work.
In the real world, what do you find? What do most people realize this? I mean, do they, after they've contracted somebody to go and design a web logo or a fancy trademark or something, do they actually go and do the assignment?
Regrettably, they often only realize too late.
Okay.
And they realize once the situation has arisen where the copyright work, where they want to enforce it, or they've changed ad agency, or their prototype is suddenly being used to create another prototype. And they suddenly go, well, this is not acceptable. I mean, what about the rights that we had in it? And only to find out that, in fact, they didn't secure their rights up front. So the best advice is always up front to make sure that you have a contract covering what you've instructed any other party to create on your behalf, and that all the copyright in that document or whatever it is vests in you. I mean, take for example a music CD. There are about 5 or 6 different types of copyright work in that, which explains sometimes why the costs are what they are, because there's the person who created the musical score, there's the person who created the words, there's the person who created the sound recording, there's the artistic cover, which is another form of artistic copyright. So all of these things add together. So it must be important when thinking of copyright to think outside the box and look at a contract to make sure you secure those rights.
You mentioned the 50 years or even the 70 years if it's the United States. Do I have to pay any maintenance fees, anything like that, to keep it regular?
Absolutely not. Again, the importance here, and especially in a company, is to ensure that you keep very accurate records of the copyright that you've created, and that you can sustain showing who the author was. Because authors, to be honest, are generally individuals or humans employed by your company. And in that 50-year period, you may need to prove your copyright. And if you don't have a good database of the information showing how that work was created, proving it is going to be that much more difficult.
In terms of copyright, the way that we practice copyright in South Africa from an IP point of view, is that similar the rest of the world?
It's very similar to the rest of the world. And the good thing is that South Africa is which provides that copyright created in South Africa or in any other country which is a member would be protected in South Africa.
Just one last question to wrap up with. Obviously the internet, that's a very different scenario. I wrote something, I'm the copyright owner, by virtue of publishing it maybe becomes available on the internet, and now suddenly it's accessible all over the world. Do I still have rights?
You do. And again, copyright is what we call in the legal profession as a negative right. It's one of those things that you need to take action to enforce your rights against other parties.
So I got to write somebody a letter or tell them you are infringing on my
Correct.
On my
but
copyright.
I think the internet and the explosion of the internet technology has begun, at least to, we're starting to think as to how we identify copyright and how we define it, because copyright is probably infringed every day by other people. They think it's quite acceptable to lift a photograph from somebody else's site and use it on your own. That's not correct. In the same way you can't lift pieces of an article. And it's not a question, I think some people have this mistaken perception that if you only take out 10 lines it's acceptable. No, not at all. It goes to whether or not that is the essential part of the work. And it could be a one line, it could be, you know, we'll fight them on the beaches. And that could be the copyrighted statement, which then is what you would be infringing if you copied it.
Thank you very much, Marilyn, for joining me in the studio tonight.
Pleasure.
Thanks. Remember to always think about the ownership of your intellectual property, especially copyright, inheritance, designs and trademarks, as you may not own the underlying intellectual property. That's all for tonight. Keep well from me, Stefan Lamprecht.
Intellectual Property was proudly brought to you by Adams & Adams, rooted in 100 years of excellence in intellectual property law.